Well, for all of you who are sitting here, I think you're quite aware that by listening to this class or attending the classes here, your main objective is to study the Dharma, contemplate and practice the Dharma. And to do that, you have to plan your time accordingly. It is the best if you can arrange some time to study the teachings that you've never studied before. And or you can familiarize yourself or practice upon the teachings you've studied before. In this way, it is quite meaningful. I know many of you, in fact, don't have a firm foundation in the Dharma studying and contemplation. So let it be five treatises or Sutrayana and Mantrayana teachings. If you really want to receive those teachings, I think it is the best if you can receive it from a genuine spiritual teacher, such as Khenpo and Khenpo's, and or you can listen to the teachings that was recorded before or read the commentaries. In this way, you can study. You can accomplish the Dharma studies that you wish to receive. I really hope that you don't escape or don't give up because of little difficulties and little hardships. To have a human life like this is really difficult, and to have an opportunity to listen to the Dharma is very difficult, and we never know how long we have, and we have very limited opportunity to study the Dharma. So in the limited opportunity, in limited lifetime, we should generate the limitless merits. So I'll give you the oral transmission.
Jagor to Egyptian alarm, Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche, going to Toban Power Shinjilo, going to Toban Power Shinjilo, going to Toban Power Shinjilo, Yanonita Carta, Olata, Rurmo Mafia, Tam Jora Mambornam, to be new. Kurtama, Sha, the Tertane Nawata, Kibayino, Dubra, Kibayino, Dubra Sha, Sanchin Chichi Lambda, no, go out of Namdandro Sha, Lohunji Nam Tomden, the Lodan Dambe Lichja, Dan, Kala Sotin Sha, Sormu Signa, Jama Sha, Kawa Jordan Licha, Dan, Jordan Nila Soba, Dan, Chung of Gundandro Sha. Devin Tarna Jibder Sha, the Imsan Jud, the Imsan Mujunana, Mam Tarngar number Sha, Zandakipper Sha, Ushir, Keper, Gina, Tsikyang, Jota, Lama Lana, Kapsar, Gavjan, Chief Joshi, La, Tarmujajan, Mayan Sha, Lami Gua, number Sha, Gutang Lapa Lasso, Labi Kana, Gabra Sha. Shava Zunni Jamba Yi, Tutakina, Libera Sha, then the Turban, the Baton, Kusu Surgeon, Dambadan, Pipsik, Tarmo Jerva Yi, Nyan So, Dola, Sura, some Dava, Nim Kurshuba, Tamchilla, Yen Archer, Mebersha. Mozan Jip Damba Ye, Vagma Sarvi, Cernesha, Gabala Soshava, Tombin Dunder Power Sha, Giant Tinti Sha, Rung of Tagala, Dorver Sha, Ravni Jirkur Jamchatan, Loma de Ton, Chaparnam, Yerter Lama, Nana, Jimana, Masha, Wo. Janji Lasso Chotopa taken Lama taken Lama Namla Wara Ti Tabablani no Jantalan Chivdir Sha Lami Luma Lummer Mana Luma Lamim Dunda Mana Himger Tardan Dambadan Shakso Sheba Lobra Sha Slohan Lana Kambra Dan Lami Jana Kamsarpa Telapti Lagniki, Lodan Dambe, Lombersha, Chamber Jigme Geratan, Ranko Kamshut, Lapson Bear, Punji, Ramshu, Lende Ba, Gave, Panson of Lobersha, Navi, Lami, Shava, La, Jima, Nover Young, Kabar Nam Navsha, she young, Gazam Danla, Dugman Ger, Dharma Mava Jeju Go, Lama Dipshit Ganyan Ba, Mamni Shit Ba Ganpang No, Tedang Telam Bat Dipshit. Kongtrul Lokon Jim Zhang Ye, Dojin Zamba Nida Song Ber, Shi Nermubo Tamji, Lama Yonsum Nibber, Sha, Samba Tabit Loma, no Kumshokson, Lapsong, Lami, Jisen Jigban, Katon, Jerver, Jimber, Sha, Denir, Nelso, Jimba Ye, Damchu, Snot, Shenis, Savi Tonga Jijan, Lockdown Zamba. Zamba Nita Sha, Teter Lami, Jinji Lobman, Mali, Panuki, the Lo, Stun Medan Doshi, gave am Tai, Duckage of Saba, Din and Roagun, Gun near Din and Drogan near the Gertir Jig, Lamarangapsa, Logan Jimbo, Stallion, Jim Zabar, Zoso, Jagar Jim Khenpo, Pamakara, Guarda, Jichinji, Lozava. Well,
that was the oral transmission of 50 stanzas on following the teacher, composed by Ashvaghosha. In fact, as a Buddhist, I think it is quite important for us to study it. Today I've given you the oral transmission, and this text has 50 stanzas only. Therefore, I really wish that you could take the time to study it, because it would be rather very, very meaningful. Because only receive the oral transmission is not enough. You have to study it with a Khenpo or Khenmo. Many people don't understand how to rely on a spiritual teacher at all. After receiving the Dharma, but not understanding how to relate to a teacher, can you attain enlightenment? Can you gain realization that way? It's very difficult. In one of the chapters I translated from Wish-Fulfilling Treasury by Longchenpa, I think many Khenpos and Khenmos tutored you on that. Now, though we don't have that much time to talk about this, but the previous masters all placed great importance on how to relate to spiritual teacher. Same as commentary on Resting the Mind and Words of My Perfect Teacher and so on. But in this particular text, in fact, it has quite a few key texts. I also translated the commentary on this text. But today I only give you the oral transmission for the stanzas. Next time, I really hope that you can reflect on yourself and how you relate to a teacher. Now I'll give you the oral transmission of transforming suffering and happiness.
Chekchung digla chekchi sombar tartan diwand manro wa kago divshir to ngobo te to martak ba ta dingurwi number go tmani tela skyoshi chimbo kete te to yed vagmelle lobra lam lobba lam batcha yangda nyamda terter tripi demjur tamchidum nokchungla nyengmu mambo tam jera yin mochi wonja gajigla yonda yo ter tumbe dingurji raw nyambar kerwe mi shangchib jibana chi kago Dever nebi, Shanchip Drabana, Chief Laver, Sonde, Dam, Derter, Kipki Ngani, Chup Drip the Yopana, Sonum Chira India, Din der Chijang, Destin D, Chu Nyoja, Chule Yang, Destit Gidmer, John with Sergi, Chudang Devani, Panson, the Troxun Rovala, Jean Rochette, Zandana Shingar Note, Tonga Kura Tarta, Tambo, Gangim Batini, Taming Nirkson, Girnro, Nyamda, Drumte, Dekit Gangshon Chudang Chila, Nyambo, Long with the Renzen Wombago, Kikian, Tingu Mazambe, Chujipi, Lecture Mandrover, Tadon, Dekit Zervaji Gonda, Rene, Tundam, Sha Mambu Ngala, Matsik Nimbur, Yang Tenit, Chirtrum Timber, Chirtrum Tuntum, the Jarva Chukshiki, the September of Shao, Kumchuk Kajanda, Shanchip, Semjung of Dambala Teni, Kit, Lamden, Kerserso, Jamyang Yot Motiate, Rejik Desamo, Dreyan, Wenba Teni, Sarjan, Dan Tremor, Jean Gupaner, Dunger Lamkirdan, Jago, Ton Tamla Tenbag, Ngami Shiso.
Well, that was the oral transmission for transfer suffering and happiness into enlightenment, and now let's have the actual class on it. in this text, it has 3 main parts, and then that is initial statement, actual text, and concluding text. The main part talks about also 2 parts, and that is transforming suffering, and then the other transforming happiness into enlightenment. In terms of transforming suffering into enlightenment, it talks about through relative truth and through absolute truth. We've already talked about that. So today we then moved on to the second aspect of it, where we're going to talk about transforming happiness into enlightenment, which also has 2 aspects, that is through relative truth and absolute truth. I think many of you probably already gained some insights based on our previous teachings on how to transform suffering into enlightenment. I think if you can, once you receive this pith instruction, if you can keep that in mind, then later on in your life, you will be able to feel happy when suffering dawns on you instead of feeling suffering. And for those of you who are very confident, then you can make supplication to the spirits saying that, well, if you can, just give me all the obstacles and problems. Of course, that is when you are very confident. Sometimes when we have teachings as profound as this, and the corresponding circumstances just appear itself. For example, when we talk about transforming suffering into enlightenment, and naturally there are some problems would occur in your life, and then you would have opportunity to practice on it. And then at that time, you should think to yourself, this is wonderful. This is the city coming from the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. This is because of the blessings of the 3 jewels. I am experiencing grave suffering. You can think in such a way, you can contemplate like this. Of course, it is completely up to you to practice. I really hope that every one of you could infuse the Dharma into your own mind, to be one with the Dharma. Because if you can do so, then even a short pith instruction like this, in a short period of life, then you can become a genuine practitioner. I think about it sometimes to myself, that nowadays we don't have many people listen to the Dharma over here, unlike a few years ago where we had a lot of people. And nowadays we have much less. But I think it's okay as well, because this kind of teaching, this kind of teaching, I think the recordings as well as the commentaries will be made available to others later on, and I think it will help other people to transform suffering into enlightenment and not retrogress on their own path. In fact, I think learning the Dharma is so very meaningful in this lifetime. It is not necessarily that you have to have a long preparation to study the Dharma. It is not necessarily that you have to be very eloquent to study the Dharma. In fact, as short as this title, if you can diligently practice upon this title, then in a short few classes, you can understand the genuine meaning, even if you didn't practice with great effort. But after a few years, you will definitely have lots of changes if you never give up on this. According to Jewel Forest of Dharma Garden, it says that if a person who lived for 100 years but being very lazy and not diligent in practice, it is not as worthy. Such kind of life is not as worthy as someone who practiced even for a day with diligence. In fact, there are people who stayed with their teacher for 20, 30 years, but if they don't have a sacred outlook, it is meaningless. There are people who later on, after staying with a teacher for 33 years, but at the end, not only they generated wrong view, they slandered self and others, and then ended up destroying self and others altogether. This kind of person, doesn't matter how long they've practiced, it is really not of much meaning. But if you can be very diligent, then and short teachings as this teaching, if you can put it into your actual practice, then eventually one day you will be able to gain immeasurable benefit from it. The previous masters didn't spend a long time in the Dharma studying, such as Chaklo Tsawa. He only went to India for a few years, but after he got back from India, he gained the essence of the Dharma. He studied the essence of Dharma, and he could genuinely propagate the Dharma as well as benefit sentient beings. Same applies to Master Fa Xian, who went to India. I think many of us, in fact, spend more time in studying than Master Fa Xian's time in India. Same as Phuntsok Rinpoche, according to his biography, he only stayed in Sercho County for 6 years. Therefore, wherever we are, I'm sure we will encounter some obstacles and difficulties, but if you can transcend that, if you can immerse yourself, infuse your own mind into the Dharma, then eventually you will have the opportunity to propagate the Dharma as well as benefit all sentient beings. Especially, I think, for the young people nowadays, if you can put the effort, if you can be one with the Dharma, if you can infuse your mind with the Dharma, I'm sure in the future that you will have more opportunities. I know that nowadays we're facing lots of changes, but there are many changes happening. There could be many changes of the society in one's lifetime. At the beginning, you may feel like it's really nothing, just as how in spring or summer over here, there are blazing sun all of a sudden, and the next moment you have thunderstorm, and then the moment after you have cloudless sky again. So you never really know what's going to happen. And eventually there will be opportunities in our own mind. I think it's important to note that if you generated genuine realization of this teaching, of teachings as simple as this, as transforming suffering and happiness into enlightenment, and then share it with others, I think it will be very beneficial. But if you don't have any enthusiasm or interest in this teaching, then not only you don't have such a kind of enthusiasm to share with others, even if you are forced to share, but without your own exploration and practice up on it, I think it is not going to be very useful and helpful for the others. Therefore, I think that though this time I'm not giving teachings to a lot of people, but I think there are people who's attending this class who have genuine connection to this teaching, and then I'm sure eventually they will be able to spread the Dharma. Especially, I think this time I'm not giving this teaching to a large group, and even to this small group, everyone's wearing masks. And I think it's really important that we believe people within this small group will spread the Dharma, spread this kind of spirit to every corner of this world after 10 or 20 years. So there must be opportunities like such. Looking at a short teaching like this, I think if non-practitioners could receive it, it's going to surpass the meaning of having lots of wealth. For example, if you were to gift someone $1 million, is that person going to be happy? Well, not really, because he may have lots of greed of buying, for example, luxurious cars, Mercedes-Benz, Rolls-Royce, maybe not even the most luxurious or the ones that person hoped for. However, if you were able to gift the teaching of transforming suffering and happiness into enlightenment, then I think to that person, this kind of wisdom will be able to follow him for his whole life. Even at the time of death, he can pass away in happiness and contentment. We're not even talking about the most profound teaching. We're only talking about teachings as practical as this, as short as this. If others could receive it, I think it is a great spiritual wealth and very, very meaningful wealth. So so I really hope that you, the audience, could study with lots of effort. I remember that when I was studying from my teachers, we had rather lots of difficulties in terms of our material providings, our living environment. Not only we didn't have any electricity, isn't that painful for you guys? We didn't have electricity. Not only that, we had to collect our own firewoods, and we have to go to the mountains in Larungar and collect the firewoods, the branch and the twigs. But sometimes the twigs are rather quite wet and there's no way to light it up at all. I remember I used to live in this mud-made house, hut, and the window is made with 4 planks of wood. On top of that, I covered it up with a thin layer of plastic. So light, sheer white light would come through from that plastic. My uncle, that is the older brother of my father, he spent a night at my humble, muddy hut and saw my difficult living situation. He's a very different person than my father, in fact. My father is very positive, but my uncle is very negative, especially he really thought it was a bad idea for me to become a monk. He was trying to lit up a fire and he couldn't because it was so wet. And then he said, "You could have enjoyed salary from being a teacher. What's the point of you coming here? What's the meaning of this?" And because he was really hungry, he really wanted to eat something, but he couldn't get the fire lit up. Therefore, he was feeling really upset about it. And he said that this is the worst choice you've ever made in your whole life. And then he started to compare me with my classmates at the time, saying, "So-and-so started earning money already. Look at your life now." Of course, I think the life situation was definitely very difficult back then, but I really spent a lot of time studying and contemplating. I think at the time I felt that I didn't succeed in the sense of to gain a better life in worldly life, and I've given up everything. Therefore, I should dedicate all my effort and my time to studying the Dharma. Because I don't want to fail myself as well as my family and friends. So I think in the whole process of studying the Dharma, the whole journey, we should really encourage ourselves. We should really push ourselves to study, to receive the Dharma, just as the great masters from India and Han and the mainland area, they are so brave, and I think that is so admirable for us, the followers. When we look at Master Fazu and Master Nenghai, all of the great masters who entered into the snowy land of Tibet, and they were really quite renowned. Some of them are not so well known, but after hardship, they study the Dharma, and then their career of propagating the Dharma was very successful as well. However, anyhow, after studying all of this, we should study with depth, we should study with steadfastness, we should not get distracted. Otherwise, we won't be able to receive Dharma at all, and then that won't be meaningful to anyone. We're not here to enjoy a luxurious life. We're in fact being here to enjoy the flavor of Dharma and to live for the Dharma. Therefore, that is in fact the meaning of our life here. If we only talk about food and living situations and arguing with our Dharma, fellow Dharma practitioners, it is really not meaningful anymore. Anyhow, I think I got really sidetracked. I got really lost. So let me get back to the actual teaching. Now, the first one is now we're going to talk about, first of all, how to use happiness as path to enlightenment through relative truth. So happiness has to be transformed into enlightenment as well. Many people would wonder, why do I need to transform happiness into enlightenment? Suffering, I understand, but why don't we just enjoy happiness? In fact, happiness needs to be transformed into enlightenment as well, or transformed onto the path. Whenever happiness and the various things that cause happiness appear, such as health, such as great fame, and you have a good mood and you have a good circumstances to enjoy and so on. You see the beautiful blue sky and the fluffy white clouds when you're having summer field trip. You're eating well, delicious food. You're dressed up well. You look really beautiful, at least to yourself. You think that I must be the most successful person in this whole world. And then you just kind of dwell in that whole happy mood for yourself. But if you don't transform that happiness, it's very easy to get lost in it. When we encounter suffering, we need to learn how to encourage ourselves. We have to be strong and resilient. But when we have happiness, I think it's very easy to become, to dwell in that happiness, and in that way we would get lost. If we slip under the power of happiness, and then we will grow increasingly conceited, smug, and lazy, which will block our spiritual path and progress. I think when we're happy, and lots of people tend to get really arrogant. They will feel that they're wonderful, so great. I'm not sure if you're familiar with a book called The Lucifer Effect. An American psychologist wrote it. Why is this book so famous, so well known? Because I think from some aspect, we can say that this is a book to warn us that we have to transform happiness into enlightenment. Well, from a relative example, from a relative world. Well, this was an experiment made by a Stanford University professor. He hired 24 students, and he initially wanted to do a 2-week-long experiment. So he separated the 24 people into 2 groups, one group of inmates and the other group playing the role of guards. At first, maybe because they're all students, they thought it was fun and they didn't really take it very seriously. But after a week, they started to take their roles more seriously. The guards started to get really violent, and the inmates started to get really fearful. And at the end, they couldn't even last for 2 weeks, but the experiment was put to a halt. And this experiment really shows that at the beginning, people really had nothing. But once they had money or fame or social status, they started to take those very seriously and got lost with those circumstances. Just as some of the volunteers I know, at the beginning of a certain post, when they're assigned as the leader, as a supervisor, they would feel really shy about it. But after a little period of time, they would really hold that role very solidly and think, oh, look at me, I'm the supervisor, you should treat me like such. Just like how the inmates and just like the students who played the roles of inmates and cell guards. People, once they gained social status and they gained different kinds of fame and wealth and maybe even beauty, they started to get really arrogant and conceited by other people's praise and compliments, especially for the foolish ones. And those are examples of not transforming happiness into enlightenment. So why should we transform happiness into enlightenment then? It is when people think that, oh, I'm so great, I am a supervisor. But really, when you look at it, you're a supervisor, but you have for example, deputy chief on top of you who are higher on the hierarchy and someone else who's on a higher hierarchy. So it's really nothing too great about it. And therefore, I think the Lucifer effect really pointed out some of the situations or people's mentality in our society nowadays. We can say that they're mirrors of the society. In the journey of practice, in fact, it is easy for us to slip under the power of happiness or arrogance as well. It's very easy to become, for those kind of happiness to become our obstacles. Just as in the Prajnaparamita Shastra, it says that if a person who has arrogant mind, then the nectar of the Dharma will not enter that person's mind. So if we don't transform happiness into the path, then even if the person looks rather quite successful now, but later on, eventually that person will slip under the power of happiness eventually. Just as Mipham Rinpoche said, everything in samsara, in fact, are all like dreams and illusions. One should not be arrogant when rich and powerful, nor fearful and weak when poor and unsuccessful. So, really, all the worldly enjoyments are nothing special. You may have fame, you may have wealth, but who knows what you have or not have tomorrow. And even if you have some money, but compared to the most rich man in this world, you still have much, much less. So you should consider it in such a way. There's a story in the sutra. It says that there was once an old bhikshu in the Sangha of the Buddha. He sweeps his floor every day, and everybody looks down on him. And he himself is really slow as well. He couldn't memorize the stanzas, doesn't matter how many times he tries. And then one day, a king was going to make offering to the Sangha. And because the Buddha knows at the time it is the time to it's time to help the old bhikshu to gain realization, inner realization. Therefore, he transformed himself into or appeared or manifested as a student. At the time, the old bhikshu felt really upset and depressed, feeling that everyone looks down on him and he doesn't want to live anymore. He was just about to hang himself on the tree. And then that student who was the Buddha suddenly showed up and started to scold him, saying that what's the use of killing yourself? You should really confess your previous bad karma. You should know that at the time of the Kashyapa Buddha, there was a bhikshu who was very knowledgeable, but he was very arrogant, and that was you. And then the old bhikshu started to confess and then received a certain fruition. Later on, he went to the palace to also receive the offering from the king, as well as along with the 500 bhikshus. And then the Buddha told him to sit on the throne and give teachings to the rest of the people. At first, the people didn't understand why the old bhikshu was sitting on the throne, and but because the king was there, so all the other bhikshus didn't want to say anything. And once the bhikshu started giving the teaching of Dharma, because he already attained a certain level of fruition, his teaching was very powerful, and many people who were listening to his teaching attained realization as well. So even though maybe even now you have some merit and wealth, don't get too happy. Just as the weather, maybe today the weather is really good, but all of a sudden it could become a thunderstorm very soon. So don't feel that, oh, the weather is so great, I'm so happy, or the weather is terrible, what do I do? Don't do that, because the weather could get clear again very soon. Just as that, we shouldn't grasp onto happiness nor suffering. And then, according to Padampa Sanji, he pointed out if we human beings can cope with lots of suffering but very little happiness. I think this teaching is excellent. I think even if we encounter some suffering and obstacles, if we try very hard, we can deal with that. We can cope with it. Some of our fellow practitioners, in fact, are of this type of personality. Whenever they encounter problems, they are more calm and they are more resilient. But so it is quite important to see the person's true character through obstacles. There are people who would all of a sudden get more wisdom and more strength when there's obstacles. And on the contrary, there are people who would encounter suffering and not able to have strength. But there are people who could deal with suffering really well, but not very well when it comes to happiness. They could get lost very quickly if they are happy. Just as some of the Dharma masters, at the beginning when they are practicing in hardship, they are very diligent. But once they gain fame and wealth and other people's offerings, they becomes rather arrogant. Just as some teachers I know, at first they really invested time and effort in practicing the Dharma during hardship. But later on, when he has students and disciples, he would then stand in the center and a group of students on the left, on the right, and he himself looked like a great toku in the middle, and he would say, oh, I'm here, I'm doing really well in my Dharma practice, in my Dharma propagation and benefiting all sentient beings, and the government is also supporting me. This is my great disciple, and that one is my great that one also provides me great support, and now I'm going to have dialogues with scientists. I'm not even sure if that person could understand science with this kind of attitude. Anyhow, there are people who can cope with suffering. but not so much of coping with happiness. During Cultural Revolution, there were great masters who can cope with suffering quite a bit, but after the opening up, then they would receive lots of offerings, and some of them eventually got derobed, which is not so successful at the end. There are examples like that too. So there are people who could not cope with suffering. There are the ones who could cope with suffering but not with happiness. In fact, it's difficult not to be carried away by happiness. So that's why we need to open our eyes in whatever ways we can to the fact that happiness and things that cause happiness are all actually impermanent and are by nature suffering. So try as best as you can to arouse a deep sense of disillusionment and to stop your mind indulging in its unusual apathy and negligence. This is quite important. Just as it is stated in Precious Garland of Madhyamaka, it says that the so-called happiness is in fact suffering in disguise. It is just an illusion created by our dualistic thoughts. Same as 400 verses, it says that in fact happiness is suffering because happiness changes. At the time of losing such happiness, people would feel pain. So when we're happy, I think in fact such happiness doesn't have intrinsic meaning because it is just like a dream, like an illusion. There's nothing to obtain in the absolute truth. The Buddha said all the happiness from celestial realm and human realm should be seen as insubstantial, and one should see the world just as a foolish play. It has the form but nothing intrinsically existent. So we should know that all the happiness, just like a fool's game, it is a game, but through your observation with your wisdom, you should understand that in fact they're all empty, insubstantial, and doesn't even have a name to it. And if we were to contemplate in such a way, then we should understand that in fact all the happiness in this world has nothing reliable about it at all. And therefore, after contemplating upon it, even when you are really happy, you would feel that happiness is nothing to be grasped onto. You should be able to understand that and to see the true face of happiness. And in such a way, once you see the defiled happiness, in fact, is nothing to grasp onto. It's not worth grasping at all. According to the Uddanavarga Sutra, it says that just like fish living in a swamp of water that decreases daily, our life also decreases daily and decrease day by day. In such a way, where is the happiness? What are we being so happy about? So our lives decrease day by day. For example, if my life has 30,000 days, but every single day that I spend in this life, that means I have one less day to live. There's really nothing to be so arrogant about. Just like a cow that is locked up in a slaughterhouse, though temporarily he may feel really happy, but for people with wisdom, upon their perception, upon their investigation, they would know that you may have happiness now, but it won't last long. So the fish living in a little spring or swamp, once the water stops, then the so-called happiness, seeing the fish swimming here and there, that kind of happiness, in fact, there's nothing to be happy about, really. Understanding the truth of the defiled defile happiness in this world, you won't be so arrogant about happiness anymore. You won't grasp onto the so-called happiness anymore. You won't be so distracted, and you won't be squandering your days without practicing anymore. You won't squander your time doing meaningless things either. So all the happiness and all the happiness and material wealth of this world is trifling and insignificant and brings with it all kinds of problems and difficulties. Still, in certain sense, it does have its good side. Well, the worldly happiness does look good. It's very attractive. It may look even meaningful temporarily. Whatever happiness in this world, the happiness from wealth or from relationship and so on, in fact, all of those happiness are connected to suffering, to obstacles. And because of that, I think there are people who want to get rid of happiness altogether. In fact, that is not necessary. Happiness also has its merits. Buddhism talks about not falling into the two extremes. People would say that, but someone wrote a book on life is suffering. You must be wrong. In fact, happiness also exists. That is the more of a Madhyamaka way of looking at it. Why are you so happy? So why is that then? The Buddha also said that someone whose freedom is impaired by suffering will have great difficulty attaining enlightenment. For example, if you don't have freedom, physical freedom, if you are imprisoned, or freedom from illness, or if you don't have freedom of having certain provisions in this life, then if you're in all those kinds of situations, I think practicing in this lifetime would be very, very difficult. Therefore, if you don't even have all the basics of life, the basics of freedom, it will be very difficult to practice. There are people out of different causes, such as family, work, and their own obstacles. They then don't have opportunities to practice the Dharma. There are people who have everything but lacks faith and devotion, then they can't practice either. So then the Buddha said that for this kind of people, it's very difficult for them to practice. So compared to that, for someone who is happy, it is easier to attain enlightenment, to practice the Bodhi. People who are happy, maybe they have sufficient food and clothing and all kinds of circumstances. Maybe they even look good, they have good relationship, everything. And then it would be easier for them to attain enlightenment. There are practitioners, however, have nothing, really have no house, no food, no corresponding situation or circumstances to practice the Dharma. Then it doesn't matter how much they try in this life, they would feel that I really couldn't spare the time or get the favorable conditions to study the Dharma. I am suffering so much. Maybe it is because of my previous karma. I'm so poor, I really have no way of studying the Dharma. So for those kind of people, I think it will be very difficult to attain enlightenment. On the other hand, if you have your own space, if you have some freedom, and for those kind of people who have happiness in their mind, then there are opportunities for such ones to practice on the path of Bodhi. What good fortune then to be able to practice the Dharma in a state of happiness like this. And there are people who are really happy. They're very content. They feel that I can listen to as many classes as I want. I can practice the Dharma, and my family, friends all support me, and I have my own savings, and I'm in good mood often. I don't have wrong view or difficulties with others. I think I only need maybe 2 more days to attain the supreme realization of the Maha'ati. They would feel that with the blessings of the 3 jewels, or maybe because of the fruition from the previous virtuous actions they've done in previous lifetimes, they feel that their present lifetime is very meaningful. So from now on, in whatever way I can, since I have such good fortune, I must convert this happiness into Dharma. And then from the Dharma, happiness and well-being will continuously arise. This then means that maybe because of your previous accumulated merits, in this lifetime you still have the opportunity to practice the Dharma. And because of that, this kind of happiness is still you still have this kind of happiness in this lifetime. But nowadays, for worldly people, I think the non-practitioners, maybe they have all kinds of favorable conditions and happiness, such as wealth, such as all kinds of conditions. But they don't really use it on studying the Dharma. They don't use it on propagating the Dharma or benefiting others. They only use their favorable conditions to get distracted more into the worldly preoccupations. There are happiness for non-practitioners as well, but is that kind of happiness going to be a virtuous cycle? If you don't know how to invest your happiness, then it could become the cause of suffering, and happiness is difficult to gain. So we should then invest it very wisely. When you already have happiness, it is the best not to get distracted in this happiness. Do not squander it. It is best to rather spend that happiness in practice. Previously, we've already talked about how there are people who don't have freedom or who are constantly in a state of rather constrained. Then in this way, even if you practice aesthetic, then you can't even gain the worldly wisdom. According to Abhidharma Sutra, it says that the hardships and aesthetic practices in one's body and the afflictions burning in one's mind, through all of those, if one do not have genuine wisdom, then if you can't even have the worldly wisdom, then you can't gain the transmundane merits for sure. So you have to first of all have the freedom and happiness, and then once you have it, you should use that to study the Dharma. That's how I can train in making Dharma and happiness support one another. To make sure that they can support one another is quite important. According to the Sutra of Collected Essential Teachings, it says that if one practices virtuous deeds, then one will eventually gain the supreme happiness. I think at least nowadays, people have the opportunity to listen to the Dharma, to learn the Dharma. This is really quite rare. I think that in one's lifetime, you could encounter all different sorts of things. But the most important of all, the most important merit of all is to have the opportunity to study and contemplate and practice the Dharma. And with the cause of this, then in the future you will definitely receive more happiness, because at that time then you will be able, the fruition of the previous merits will come to maturation, and then at the time you will have more opportunity to practice virtuous deeds again, which could lead to more happiness again. In such a way, it is a virtuous cycle. But without such kind of cycle, if you were to create devious or misdeeds first, then you will continue to suffer in samsara, and it's really meaningless. So when we have happiness, do not grasp onto it, but to use this happiness on the Dharma. I hope people who are sitting here, it is hard to say what's going to happen the rest of your life, majority of which will be going with the force of your own karma and conditions. But in general, I think even if you have some opportunity in this year to listen to the Dharma, even if you have the opportunity to listen to the Dharma in 10 months or so, you should feel that, well, my life is really meaningful. This is the most meaningful and the most memorable part of my life. You should consider, you should think about it in such a way. When you have the opportunity, you probably don't know how to cherish it yet. Just as when your parents are still alive, you really don't feel their importance, but once they die, they passed away, you would feel that you must have been, you were really happy when your parents were still alive. So when you have this kind of opportunity to listen to the Dharma, you probably won't feel much about it, but when you don't have the opportunity, you probably would feel that, oh, I must have been very happy back then. And then it says that the main point to get here is that whatever happiness, whatever well-being comes our way, we must unite it with Dharma practice. Otherwise, it's like just trying to boil water in a wooden saucepan. So at the beginning, maybe we have happiness, we listen to the Dharma and so on, but we didn't cherish it, we didn't use that opportunity to generate more happiness and more virtuous deeds. Or maybe at the beginning, maybe you created some wrong deeds or wrong aspiration or misdeeds, really, and you squandered the causes for your happiness. Just like when you want to charge your battery, if you do not charge your battery, then you would not have you were not able to use it anymore. So just like that, if you were to boil water in a wooden saucepan, then at the end you would end up having nothing at all. So that's how people would lose their happiness. It's really the same thing. There are practitioners who would practice very diligently, but then later on, because of other conditions, maybe the wrong friends, wrong circumstances, wrong habitual patterns and so on, they ended up not receiving anything at all, not gaining anything at all. So at the end, it's really quite a pity if they started off with happiness but ended up having nothing. Therefore, we have to make sure that our mind is infused with the right teaching, with the genuine Dharma. So when you're happy, for example, you are on a summer field trip, and you should think that all the sentient beings in the three realms, they must want to receive, they must want more so that they can be contented. Therefore, I must then make dedication of merit to all of them so that they may receive whatever I have. This is a very simple practice. For example, you could think, oh, this stinky tofu tastes so good. Why don't you try it? So not only you would enjoy it, you can think of to share such happiness with others, with the sentient beings. If you feel a little bit stingy, however, just as some practitioners would say that, I don't really want to give it to you, but I can visualize to give it to you. Is it really visualizing? Well, I can only visualize to give it to you. Is that really giving? So this is how to unite happiness to our practice. For example, if you're really happy today, just as how the previous master said that one should not squander the happy moment nor the suffering moment. What does that mean? It means that, first of all, when you're enjoying happy moments, you should think about if you are using this opportunity to practice the genuine Dharma. When you're happy, you should contemplate that this happiness is very impermanent, and this happiness is bestowed by the three rules. And I would like to also share this happiness with all the sentient beings in such a way that you won't squander the happiness, but you would have more happiness. So you shouldn't waste the suffering experiences in any ways either, because even if you are going through very difficulty sufferings, if you were to complain and so on, then this kind of suffering would be wasted. But if you were to practice or use the suffering as a practice, and just as the previously stated in this text, thinking that I'm suffering a lot, the sentient beings in this samsara is suffering a lot, I really wish them could attain enlightenment as soon as possible. And if someone would give you a needle shot, and you would first of all think it's very scary, it's painful, and then at that moment you can think that, okay, may I receive all of the suffering coming from all the sentient beings. And in this way, the suffering and pain from a needle shot would not be squandered. When people are happy, they would laugh out loud, and when the non-practitioners are unhappy, they would cry out loud, and they don't have any deep practices. But for practitioners, we should really use any experiences in our life into the path of enlightenment. So the practitioners are really very different than the non-practitioners, because when they're happy, they would feel that, oh, all the happiness in this world are all like dreams and illusion. I myself, sometimes when I walk on the meadow, I would see some skulls and bones of the dead yaks, and I would contemplate that while the yaks were happy once walking on this meadow and enjoy himself, but then eventually we will all be like the yak that is now, that is just a pile of bones and skull. So in this way, you would generate a genuine renunciation, thinking about impermanence. So there are many ways of practicing with the happiness and suffering. This is the whole vision behind Nagarjuna's garland of jewels, because in the garland of jewels it says that to enjoy wealth in this lifetime, and to offer your wealth to the others, you will enjoy the happiness in other lifetimes. There are many conditions for death. There are many conditions for birth. There are much less conditions for birth. So we should cherish all the opportunities and conditions to practice the Dharma. So there are many teachings such as this that is included in the garland of jewels. This is the whole vision behind this teaching. In fact, even though we may be happy, if we don't recognize it, we will never be able to make use of that happiness as an opportunity of practicing the Dharma. When we're happy, if we don't recognize its happiness, then that happiness won't become the favorable condition to practice the Dharma. If you're not ill, if you're very healthy, if you're wealthy, at that time you're very happy. But when people are in such happy situation, you probably don't even recognize that you're happy, that you're lucky. So you should not waste such happiness. You have to use such happiness on the path of genuine Dharma. And we will, and we should not expect for some extra happiness that will come our way. Don't feel so greedy for more happiness. In fact, you already have everything. You should already be contented. When people ask you whether you're happy, you should say, yes, I'm the most happy. Why is that? Because I'm healthy. I have a healthy mentality. I have lots of providings. I recently received a bonus of $1,500. So I have everything. I have freedom to walk underneath the blue sky and white clouds. I have everything. But if you don't think in such a way, rather you think in the way that I'm not happy now, but I wish I could be happy. In this way, I think that's what most of the non-practitioners think. When people ask them, are you happy? They would say that, well, I am not happy now, but if I'm doing a project, I am currently planning to cooperate with so-and-so and with the plan with our project management and so on. I think eventually I will become as wealthy as the universal monarch, and then at that time I think I wouldn't have too much difficulties to become happy. I think this kind of sense of longing and a sense of looking for more, looking for extra mentality is very common in our world. Therefore, next time when people ask you whether you're happy or not, well, you're happy. You have everything already. You should be content. Otherwise, our desire could go limitless, and there's really no end to it. There was a king. His name is the king Uposatha. He has all the wealth in the three realms, and at the end he could sit. He has the same hierarchical seating with Indra himself, but he couldn't get content with all the wealth and happiness he has, and then he fell into the human realm and died over there. That was described in the Uposatha Sutra. It said in the Sutra of Cause and Conditions, it says that even if the sky rains precious jewels, the greedy ones won't be contented. So just like that, the foolish ones don't even have a time to feel content. That's what the wise ones should understand. I think everyone's very different. We have different merit. We have different life. But you should think that whatever you have is really your own merit, and you should be happy about that. Maybe you're not so wealthy right now. That just means that you don't have such wealth in your causes and conditions. Then you should think, I've already have everything that I should have. And similar applies to your appearance and so on, instead of looking everywhere at all times. So the antidote to do this is to apply practice wherever it is appropriate, and above all, to savor the nectar of contentment. So whenever we need to work with this, at all times we have to unite the practice of the precious Dharma with our daily activities. As we studied yesterday from the Buddhist Bequeathed Sutra, it says that the contented ones, even if they're sleeping on the ground, they feel happy. So this is quite important. According to Master Lianchi, he said that people who feel content understand what contentment is, the afflictions in one's mind could be eliminated in one moment. Some of the Western economists would think that we shouldn't feel a sense of contentment. Otherwise, we don't have any intention to progress anymore, to continuously progress anymore. That is not good. So we have to continuously to go forward, to try our best, and we have to have the aspiration more and more. In fact, I think this is the kind of spirit that is a little too arrogant. In whichever way, it is very difficult to fulfill our desire. To a certain extent, you have to understand and have to learn to be content. Of course, you can try hard. You should try hard. I think, however, I think in terms of wealth, eventually you'll be able to understand it doesn't matter how much you try. It doesn't really help. According to Nagarjuna, he said that the most precious wealth is contentment. So if you understand how to be content, and then the defiled wealth in this world are not necessity to you, but contentment is a nectar. So we should be relaxed with whatever we have, let it be social status, let it be any kinds of things that we desire in this world. Then in such a way we will be at ease. Otherwise, if we continuously to chase after them, the poorer we are, the more scarcity mentality we have. I think many people have genuine experience of that. Even though we may be happy, and then it says that there are other ways of turning happiness into path, especially those based on recalling the kindness of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and on the instructions for training in bodhicitta, but this will do for now. So whenever you feel any kind of little happiness, they are all from the blessings, and they're all from the kindness of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. I should understand that's from the three jewels. The cold, when you're in the cold area, when you can feel the warm sunlight, when it is quite hot outside, but you feel this cool breeze. In fact, those are all the blessings from the three jewels. So any little bit of happiness that you can experience in your mind stream are all the teachings, are all the things that you can use in terms of practicing bodhicitta as well. Once you feel any bit of happiness, you could think that let all sentient beings experience whatever I am experiencing. Let me offer this to all sentient beings. So that is in terms of bodhicitta practice. And the next one talks about then unite happiness into the practice of transforming happiness into enlightenment with your actual practice. We shouldn't be arrogant. The nature of happiness is in fact suffering. The nature is impermanent. The nature is empty. The nature is non-self. So you can contemplate it in such a way. You could be happy today, not necessarily tomorrow. Your happiness are just very superficial right now. They're nothing. They're very illusory. There's nothing to grasp onto. But this kind of happiness could become the cause of suffering. So this is from this angle. And then Tenpe Nyima said that, but this will do for now. I guess he must be really, really busy. So he only talked till here. As with the using suffering as a path, so with happiness too. You need to go to a solitary retreat environment and combine this with practices of purification and accumulation, merit, and wisdom. So you can go to solitary retreat and so on, and then practice, for example, mandala, offering to the Dharmapalas, and chant the 100-syllable mantra, and so on. So this is the same as practice in solitary retreat. And then second aspect is says that the absolute dimension, in fact, it's similar as previous ones when we talked about the suffering in the ultimate, in the absolute dimension. So you have to go through the recognition from the four extremes. Is it born from self, from other, from both, from no cause? And after this kind of inference, you see that the name of happiness doesn't even exist. Don't even mention its existence or its itself. So in absolute truth, in fact, there's no happiness to gain, and that is rather unfathomable realization. So how could you have such happiness that when I asked everyone, is suffering existent? All of you said not existent. In fact, later on, I went back home and I thought, oh, so lucky that nobody said it's existent. Otherwise, it would be rather a little bit embarrassing for all of us. Since yesterday we agreed that since suffering doesn't exist in absolute truth, then we would agree that happiness do not exist in absolute truth either, because the name doesn't even exist. Therefore, what is the happiness that we're grasping onto then, if it doesn't exist in absolute truth? And the happiness in relative truth is so easy to change. What is there to grasp onto? So when you're happy, don't get so arrogant, because in such a way you won't be able to succeed in your practice and probably end up unsuccessful, which is not wanted by anyone. As a practitioner, I think we should maintain a rather balanced state of mind. When you're suffering, you're also at ease, and you continue with whatever activities you're doing for the sentient beings, and do not give up on that. That is a true practitioner. Unlike there are people nowadays who would cry out loud and the tears become larger and deeper than the Indian Ocean, and when they're happy they laugh out loud so that the 3,000 world could hear the laughter. Even the Indra would feel that this person's laughing out loud so much. What is so funny? And they would hold up their ears and try to stop you. So I think this kind of unbalanced situation and mood is really not necessary. Let's try to maintain certain kind of equanimity between the both. The suffering and the happiness, in fact, are the two most strong emotions, and whenever the two strong emotions manifest in you, try to transform that into the path of enlightenment. Tomorrow we will finish the teaching.
Sonanda tanche zbanya tonani be jana pashe jirga nanji ranlong chuba chubum solen jova